Welcome to this live session hosted by Fab, your insurance broker and moving to France expert. Fab is like your immigration GP. We're here to answer all your questions: visas, residency, healthcare, driving, taxes, properties, and much more. We navigate the complexities of France to help you embrace the French lifestyle you've always imagined. Although we are experts in the immigration industry and have been working in this space since 2015, none of what we say should be considered legal or financial advice. It is also worth noting that the immigration industry is an ever-evolving field, so things that are relevant today might be outdated or inaccurate when you actually move to France. Fab's main source of revenue is insurance through our brand, Fab French Insurance. Our main goal is to ultimately help you move to France, as we only sell insurance to clients applying for a visa, a residency permit, or those with a French address. During this session, you can ask any questions you want. However, we will not answer long questions to keep the pace fast. We also won't be able to address questions related to personal or very specific issues, but rest assured, we can get in touch after the session to either advise or refer you to one of our trusted partners. And now it's time to get this event started. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you find our answers valuable. Our greatest reward would be to be a part of your journey to moving to France. And hopefully, it starts with this session today. We will pause briefly to allow all registrants to join. The session will begin shortly.
Hi everyone, we're now live. Thank you all for coming and for being here today. Well, whatever this is, this morning, this evening, wherever you attend this event from. This evening, I have the pleasure to be with the esteemed Nanny, who is a former US expat and now lives in France. So she'll be answering your questions in the background. And I have also the pleasure of being with Ben Small and Catharine Higginson, who, or should I say Catharine Sceats? Hopefully I pronounced that right. She'll correct me afterwards. Who will be joining me this evening to share their insightful knowledge about France and moving to France. So tonight is about, or tomorrow, this morning is about property rentals. So Ben and Kat, if you don't mind turning your cameras back on. Hi, Ben.
Hey, Fab. Hey, guys.
Hi. Hello, Kat.
Hi. Hi, guys.
So, well, very quickly, maybe you can introduce yourself, and I suppose courtesy wants Kat to go first.
Okay, ladies first. Yep, it's Skeets, which is difficult to pronounce even in English for English speakers. So I'll let you off there. I've gone back to my maiden name for the usual reasons, as they say. So yeah, I'm Catherine, and since 2009, I've been running the Survive France community website, which I co-founded with my ex-husband, and it's now the biggest community resource for English speakers in France and outside of France, because I think about 60% of our readership are in the UK. We have lots of American members, people from Australia, New Zealand, any English speaking countries, and European countries as well. Just basically anybody that is either interested in moving to France or owns a property in France or would like to be here or is already here and wants some help and resources and information. So if you haven't had a look, do check the site out, www.survivefrance.com.
Yeah, and I must admit, this is where Kat and I met in a way.
It is quite a long time ago now, yeah.
A decade ago, actually.
Wow, God,
yeah,
that's a long time.
Thank you, Kat. So on to you, Ben.
On to me. Okay. Yep. Well, my name's Ben Small. I grew up in France, actually. I've moved back and forth from France twice now for my sins. And I've been helping people move to France for the past 9 years, and specifically helping people find rentals for about a year and a half now, too. So super excited.
Successfully.
This one. Successfully. Yeah, we try to, hey.
Yeah. I mean, and you love France so much, you even married a French girl.
That's it. That's it. Yeah. Fully got in behind enemy lines there.
Some might
So
say it's brave. Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Oh, nice, nice. Well, thank you too for the introduction. Just very quickly, for those who don't know me, so I'm Fabien, founder and managing director of both Fab French Insurance and Fab Expat. So I'll be your host this evening. And well, let's start with some questions for Ben about those properties, renting those properties. Oh, and so by just very quickly, guys, if you want to ask any questions, feel free to do so in the Q&A section. We'll also post sometimes and try to answer some of your questions live. And any questions we would not have answered, we will share those with the speakers and the panelists so that they can address those after the event, and we'll send a follow-up email as well. So don't worry, everyone should be answered. So back to you, Ben. One of the biggest questions, like, timing, sequencing, basically, when should, prospective renters, like obviously considering a rent to France, to moving to France, when should they start looking for properties, especially if it's in relation to a visa application? What do you think is the ideal time frame?
Yeah, that's a great question because, like, a lot is underpinned in that visa. You need an address in France to be able to progress with things. I suppose there's two ways you could sort that. If you're feeling brave, you could use an Airbnb address initially or a hotel address initially for the visa stuff. And I suppose you could touch on that a bit more, Fab. You've got experience there. Typically, when I'm going out and people are asking me to help them with searches, we try and start 6 weeks out to reach out and test the market first. Because any time before that, French landlords will probably look at your case and profile and go, "Yeah, not being funny, guys, but I could probably get this rented out to someone else locally much sooner." So 6 weeks tends to be the sweet spot. And usually you end up finding good options within 2.5 to 3 weeks from there.
Okay, so actually quite late. Okay.
Yeah. Well, if you can play with the flexibility on that Airbnb option initially, particularly if you are from the States and we know that works, you get the added benefit of not necessarily shoehorning yourself into a property you don't like for the long term. And then you can go and visit these properties too in person because, like, you can do a lot virtually. But ultimately, you are signing a lease agreement and acting on good faith to take this property on for an extended period of time. And I know it sounds weird. I don't really know what the translation is in English, but you can't smell a property virtually, can you? You can't really get a full feel for it. And so that's why we usually go along those lines when we're advising people.
It's actually good. You mentioned, like starting with an Airbnb and stuff. Also, well, just for the audience who might be considering renting for long-term visas. So if you apply for a residency type of visa, so the 1+ year, you're supposed to have a 1-year contract, and we'll get into this because it's French specific. It's not the same as the UK or the US. It's not the same type of contract you're used to, although the name is the same. But only the 1-year lease agreement is technically visa compliant with residency types of visas or residence permit, which we call the carte de séjour. So in some countries, they do have a tolerance, but it's a political tolerance. Let's be upfront with that. So it might change tomorrow. That's what I'm saying. So US, Canada, for example, are such countries. UK is not. So like Airbnbs from the UK is not going to be accepted for a residency type of visa. And the tolerance is because of that convenience, I assume, because, well, from the UK, like you're not that far away. So that's why they're like, okay, well, you should be able to find a rental accommodation. Whereas from the US, like they probably have factor that in, that it's not as convenient because of the distance, maybe. But technically, Airbnbs aren't compliant, so we always advise to try to get a 1-year contract. But like Ben was saying, that might be seen as a plan B. Like, well, if you cannot get that by the time you're supposed to apply for your visa, you could revert to that option indeed. Which actually, because I mentioned the political state of affairs, but everything is also depends on the timing and like how's the market, how's the situation of the rental market. I mean, because you've been doing this for let's say a couple of years, how would you describe the current state of the rental market in France? Like, is it easy, is it difficult? I mean, especially for
Yeah,
international renters, obviously.
just broader France, right? Because Paris and Nice and the sort of fashionable spots have their own style generally. But yeah, usually this time of year is pretty good. It's when you get closer down into late spring when it becomes way more complicated because if you're moving to France, that beautiful part of the world, lots of people are drawn to it for holidays too. And so there's plenty of landlords over there that realize that and they hike up their prices. They realize how much they could potentially earn from a weekly, short-term let instead. So it does get a hell of a lot dicier if you're trying to move to those parts of the world late spring onwards until about September, October time when conciergeries are now saying, oh, these properties are back on the market again. Can we put it to use somewhere else? But right now, pretty good.
Okay, well, that's good to know. But in general, is it more difficult for international renters? I mean, like, do you manage to get like to find a solution, or how's the process for again international renters?
Yeah, okay. Well, so for international renters specifically, it's really important to, and Fab, you've got some experience with this as well, being in insurance. When you go to agencies for help on this, they're not often insured to help non-residents find somewhere to rent because the biggest risk is rent not being paid. It's really hard to evict someone in France, and so landlords are skeptical. They take out insurance with agencies who are also insured to cover the risk of rent not being paid. And simply they can't help because they're not insured to help someone that isn't from France, or some agencies have coverage for people from the EU, but outside of that, it gets a hell of a lot harder too. So that takes away the standard route that one would probably take to get a rental agreement in France. And so, I completely sympathize with all these people that are trying to reach out to agents and just not getting answers. The reality is they're seeing this email come in from an American or a Brit or from abroad, and they know they can't help, and they'll have a far easier time finding someone with a French payslip or a French pension instead.
In a way, that's basically your jam. That's how you can help them because you have the connections and like the realtors or the real estate agents who might be equipped to help international clients, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's the result of really not very scientific and sexy way to do work over 9 years. I just built up a load of connections with the conciergeries or, straight up contact sport, reaching out to French landlords directly on the platforms that I used 15 years ago when I was, going to uni and having a hard time finding accommodation then. It's still the same process. The
No, but
struggles haven't changed.
the grind that you keep on
That's
doing.
right.
Actually, like I remember when we met in Bayonne, like you were on tour.
That's right.
So yeah, fine,
That's
yeah.
right. Yeah, our uphill was a welcome break from all of that. So
No, that was cool. And actually, okay, so we've touched base on I'd say the specifics of international renters, but also not. I mean, that there's also common ground with should they be French as well? What are the requirements in terms of, well, usually, to rent a property, again, the 1-year lease, like financial proof. I mean,
yeah.
how the renters should be prepared to satisfy, those property owners on the financial aspect.
Sure, yeah. I mean, as a rule of thumb, landlords feel way more comfortable if your annual income is 3 times the amount of the rent that you're looking to take on with them. And so then you need to back that up. You need to prove it. Not everyone's got, the a French payslip, which is obviously the gold standard in this scenario. So you're gonna want to get a guarantor in place, someone who's going to vouch for you. And often the standard route is with Garant Me, which I think Nanny also puts some links in. So ask Nanny guys on that side for Garant Me. But failing that, you'd want bank statements ready on hand to show you've got the funds there. A really good one would be your last year's tax return showing how much money you've been paid over a year, and that generally supports your dossier, and you can move ahead. I suppose the critical part is making the effort, reaching out to these people. Obviously, that's what I do for people. But if I was on the other side trying to do it myself, I'd reach out, try and break that language barrier, show that I'm a good guy or a good gal, and then I'd send through the income statement as a way of breaking the ice, removing that fear that you're not going to be paying rent, and moving on from there.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, yeah, because it's like you were saying, and I'm a landlord myself, and I know that the biggest fear we have is like, squatters or people who end up not paying rent, because it's very difficult in France then to expel people. Well, actually, the tenant is protected in France. It's quite reversed. But maybe we can have the insight of an actual British expat, because although I think, Kat, you've been buying in France, but culturally speaking, what cultural differences like around renting, in France, might surprise those newcomers who are listening today?
Excuse me. Well, I think it's very much like Ben said. I mean, the sheer amount of paperwork that you need to be able to throw at a potential landlord to convince them that you are an upright citizen. And we did rent at one point, and we found it incredibly difficult. It was back in 2006, and on the coast, all of the agents just laughed at us and told us that people were only interested in holiday lets. So we had to move inland. That's why we never became close neighbours. So we had to move further inland. And all of the agencies that we contacted pretty much just told us to get lost, simply because we were British. They were not interested.
Even was it originally? I mean, you've been around for a few years.
Yeah, no, even though we were long-standing French residents and we'd been French property owners, and we'd sold a property recently, and we had French tax returns, they were not interested because we didn't have a CDI, which is a permanent employment contract, and we didn't fit in their boxes. And the only way we managed to rent anything in the end was we absolutely insisted that the agent put the proposition to the landlord that we would pay a year's rent up front, which was insane, but we were desperate. We'd sold a property, we had nowhere to live, we had 3 small children, we'd found the perfect house, and luckily he was quite kind of middle class and civilized and from Bordeaux, and liked the idea of having 2 British tenants, so he was okay with, but we still had to pay a year's rent up front. And I think it is,
people from the southwest are decent people. I like this.
So I think it is very, very difficult that's the first big cultural bridge, that, you're starting on the back foot, because you've got to convince. It's difficult enough for French people to convince a landlord that they should rent them a property. If you're not French, it's really tricky. So I think, the key to renting in France is to get your dossier, your file together, and stuff it full of everything that Ben mentioned. And if you have rented previously, even if it's overseas, put in your last 3 months' rent receipts, even references from previous landlords or kind of people of good standing. Guarantees are really important. Pay slips. The more paperwork you have, the better, I would say. I think that's the first biggest cultural difference, is just how many hoops you have to jump through.
And compared to, well, you were saying 2006, so like almost 20 years ago. Okay, we're young. So compared to that, because like in that meantime, you've also grow as a person, and you know more about France, and mostly and you've started this experience that survived France, that's quite big now, and so those guys, like, let's call them the newcomers, do you know of any, I don't know, communities they could tap into, like expat groups or social media? Like, do you find it relevant potentially for rentals?
Definitely. I think obviously Survive France itself is a really great resource because there are members all over France who will go out of their way to be helpful, and often word of mouth is your best bet. There are lots of local Facebook groups. We have a whole selection of Facebook groups that are linked to the main website that are all called things like English speakers in Bordeaux or English speakers in the Poitou-Charentes, English speakers in Normandy and Brittany. They're definitely worth looking at. Also, local French Facebook groups. I often see requests in those groups for the local towns or villages, or with people asking for rental properties, and it does seem the best way to go, especially if your case is a bit atypical. Often the posts I see in there from French residents, from French people are, I've got children, I've just left my husband, I haven't got a job, but I can pay the rent, I don't have 3 times my salary, can anybody help me out? And people are much more likely to put them in touch with a landlord who may be a bit flexible. So I think that as foreign residents and immigrants don't tick the boxes, I think social media, Facebook groups, community websites like Survive France are a great way to go, because that's your tradition, that's the equivalent, that's the 2025 equivalent of word of mouth down the village pub.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Oh, I'm also reading the questions in the chat box, or like the Q&A section. There's one potentially for you, Ben. An anonymous attendee is asking, do you need a French bank account to rent a French property?
No, I know there's it's easier if you're going via a French agency to do it, because then you could go down the route of a caution bancaire, when you set money aside with the
yes.
landlord that could be drawn down from.
Well, the equivalent of what Kat mentioned, like the 1 year, like
That's right, yeah, like an escrow account for it. That's the formalized way of doing it. But it's not absolutely necessary. And if you can work a way in to speak directly with landlords, they don't care. As long as they know the rent's coming in, it's more often than not fine. And the thing is, it's really, really hard to get a French bank account with it without having the address in the first place.
It's kind of a catch-22. I mean, it's actually better to start without, move to France, and get one once you have the address.
Oh, like 100%, yeah.
Because you do that as well. You help them open up bank accounts as well.
Yeah, although that's it's a done with you service rather than a done for you, because it's a hell of a process to try and get a bank account in France without having an active address yet. It's just hard.
Well, and again, it's also a matter of convenience. Like you probably don't want to have to go through more paperwork than you have to, don't you?
Yeah, all right. Yeah, exactly. You're gonna have enough anyway, as it is.
This might be a trick question, but I'll ask it anyway. But you have a joker if you don't want to answer this one. If it's too tricky, what are the biggest mistakes that Americans make concerning rentals when moving to France?
All right, that's a great question. So Americans specifically.
Actually, is there a difference, Americans versus Brits?
The only real difference would be the time at which you're reaching out and contacting, because the Brits would have an advantage to be able to pick up the phone and call an agency too, remember? It was like, good luck getting hold of a rental agent in France after, if we were trying to call now, it's game over, right? It's not a thing. So that's
even
the
6 p.m. is light. Yeah, most of the time they close already. Yeah.
Man, like, genuinely, if you're getting any luck after 4 p.m. French time for rentals, I don't know. I'm yet to see it. So the trick is, relying too much on just sending an email out or just filling in a form on the agency website saying, "Oh yeah, I like your property. Could I have a chat?" It's like Kat said, really, really good tip there was have your dossier ready in advance, like a fully fledged thing, even like a quick note on where you're coming from and why you're moving to France, because you're selling you as a perfect tenant and why it would be good to have you in, and so maybe you can appeal to their emotions a little bit, and they want to help you along on your journey into Europe. They like the idea of having an American or having a foreigner in their house. It's like a pride thing, and so you have to appeal
Oh,
to that as much as possible.
I
And it's
can relate
really
to
hard
that.
to do that just through one little message that you're putting on a property portal website or whatever.
Yeah, no, I definitely can relate with what you said, Ben, because, well, at least me, I don't know, a lot of my friends are like this, and a lot of French natives I've spoken with through my life. Usually the French love foreigners. And for us, you're exotic, like you're from overseas, like the Brits, the Americans, obviously the Americans even further away. So yes, there's definitely that. I've also seen a quick question from Monica. Would like VRBO work instead of Airbnb? So just to clear that out, we're mentioning Airbnb. We don't have stocks or shares vested with them. Um, it's just to refer to a temporary type of accommodation. Okay, so but whatever this is, a JIT or Airbnb or like that VRBO, I don't know about that. But so whatever type of short-term rental accommodation you have, if you apply for a long-term visa, so you see the difference, short-term accommodation and long-term visa, that doesn't work. You're supposed to have a long-term accommodation to go with a long-term visa. And a long-term accommodation in France, we only deal with 1 year contracts. I mean, technically, we also have the 3 years contract, but it's like a 3 times 1 year contract anyway. So it's just a 1 year contract versus temporary contracts. And if it's not a 1 year, it's going to be a temporary accommodation, whatever the type of contract. So hopefully it answers the question. Actually, I think it's good because that was my next topic and my next question for you. And because in the context of those, long stay visas, so again, we're talking about the 12 plus month. It's the visa where you intend to stay in France long term and then apply for residency and potentially stay there forever. So those short term versus long term lease, can you highlight the difference of what's a 12-month contract in France like compared to the UK or US? Because I know saying you need a 12-month contract sounds daunting to Brits or
Yes,
Americans. And can
that's
you
a really
explain the
good point.
difference
Yeah.
with a French contract?
When I first started doing this, that was like a really big trigger point because um, if you're planning to move to France, not everyone necessarily wants to stay in the property they first end up in. Firstly, you may come to a region and absolutely, you didn't realize how much you didn't like it, and you feel a bit too isolated, or maybe it's too busy, any what variation of those things. And so the idea of taking out a long-term rental whilst you're faced with those factors scares the life out of people a little bit. But France is slightly different. If you're signing a 1 year lease, a 12-month rental, you're allowed to back out of that at any time, providing you're giving a 1 month notice from that point onwards. Now, obviously, probably not the best goodwill there if you're sort of rocking up and then leaving, 1 month straight after and things, which is why I prefer it when people are already on the ground in an Airbnb or an VRBO option. But the major difference that we're not used to in the UK, and it's the same in the States, a 12-month lease doesn't tie you to it, it just ties the landlord to have to respect that.
Exactly. Yeah, no, and it's a very good point you've raised because there's the law and there's, I'd say, what you want to do. Like technically in France, it's yes, you can walk away usually within a month on a 1 year contract. But if you keep on doing that, or like just if you do that once or twice, then usually it's a small word like realtors or real estate agent. They'll know about this, and in a way, will stain your next file or application because, like, well, if you've been in that place for a couple of years or stuff, but otherwise, it makes you look like a bad type of tenant. Because again, remember, the landlord, in a way, was committed to you for that 1 year, was willing to commit and to risk, you not paying the rent and stuff. So if you walk away after 2 or 3 months, it's so if you plan on doing that, actually, I think it might actually be a good advice to be upfront with the property owner about that to avoid because
Totally.
That would leave a
And
bad mark.
that's not a bad thing, right? Depending on the year in which the time of year in which you're arriving, you could say, look, I'm coming over. I'm planning to buy in France later this year. So, preempting that stuff with landlords there, and then saying, so the likelihood is I'll be leaving in July. There's a chance that I'll be out by July. Then the landlord can go, okay, well, that's interesting. I could start preempting, other long-term leases, or maybe I want to tag along to the end of that summer season and start earning the extra, the big bucks and on the weekly rentals from that point onwards, and then put it back on the long-term market again once the season comes to an end. It's not necessarily a negative.
Yeah, no, you're right. Especially if it's a touristic place.
Yeah.
And well, speaking of chatting or talking with the landlord, any room for negotiation? I mean, like typically, is there?
It depends if we're trying to upgrade them from a short-term rental to a long-term rental, and the parameters around that you can negotiate in those situations. If I'm doing any negotiating personally, and I guess this is what you guys will be faced with, you are trying to tackle it too. Ideally, you don't end up in a scenario where you do have to stump up a year's rent all in one hit. That's a situation that comes from out of a lack of choices rather than anything else.
Yeah.
And so, it's negotiating with the landlords there, showing that the tenants got the right credentials behind them, the right financial situation to support themselves, and stopping any kind of extra condition being chucked in by the landlord to help them feel more comfortable. That's probably where the negotiation comes into play, because trying to draw the price down on things like, as I say, they'd still much prefer bringing in someone local with a French payslip, and that market's still going strong. So quite hard to push the price down as a result.
Yeah, you're better safe than sorry. For this.
Yeah.
And Catherine, well, we talk about renting, but obviously we had to address the elephant in the room. Like what should wannabe renters prioritize? Like public transport, proximity to downtown shops.
I think
tips.
that's quite a tricky one to answer, because it's a bit of a how long's a piece of string type of question, because it's a bit like looking for properties to live in. To buy rather, obviously. A lot's going to depend on people's personal preferences and situations and circumstances. So it does depend on their lifestyle and what they want. But I mean, and often people coming to France want to live eventually in a fairly rural. I mean, let's forget the cities. That's a different market, as Ben quite rightly said. But for the rest of us who want to live somewhere in rural France, often quite remote, isolated rural properties with no near neighbours are quite popular. Now, they may well be slightly less in demand with the local French rental market, who don't want to drive up a muddy track 14 times a day when they're taking their kids to the bus stop and then going to the doctors. But if you are kind of semi-retired, early retirees working from home, you don't need to go out so much. Maybe those kind of properties are going to be more suitable, and they're often in slightly less in demand, so they're a bit easier to get hold of. They may even be slightly cheaper. Having said that, don't get carried away and rent something too rural, because driving 45 minutes to the supermarket is not ideal. So again, it really depends on people's personal situation, and do you need access to medical facilities, to a GP, to a dentist on a regular basis? I mean, obviously we all need to go to the dentist twice a year, but if you need to go to the doctor every week for you've got some kind of long-term health condition, then make sure you're renting somewhere that's close to those kind of facilities, I think.
Okay. And well, for those who are looking to move or to rent into like bigger cities, like could be Bordeaux, Nice, Paris. Well, Paris would be an exception, because I mean, it's almost certain they won't be driving there. And wherever they live, there's going to be stores and convenience all around, like shops. But like Nice, Bordeaux, a lot of those places, Do you think there is something in particular they need to factor in?
I think well, with cities, you need to obviously, like you say, you're going to have all of those kind of facilities within striking distance and public transport and transport links. But again, if you know that you, for example, are going to return to your home country on a fairly regular basis, or whether it's to visit family or, for work or something, then maybe you want to be on the side of the city that's got easy access to the airport. You obviously want to live in the part of the city that's not the crime-ridden, drug-infested zone. I mean, that's not a big issue in France. I'm being sarcastic, everybody that's listening. If this is not even places like Nice and Marseille, well, they do have, higher crime levels than rural France. It's very, very low compared to a lot of places in the world. But obviously you want to live in a nice part of the city or large town or conurbation. And again, it depends on your lifestyle in terms of, are you just going to be based there, or are you going to be traveling outside of that? In that case, maybe living on the edge as a sort of the end of the tram stop's a good idea. Do you have children? Are you going to need to be near primary schools, high schools, sports facilities, that kind of stuff? Equally, if you don't have kids and your life revolves around visiting museums and galleries, then maybe somewhere central is going to be great. I think it's a really hard one to. There isn't a one answer fits everybody solution to that question. I would say it's very much a question of making a list of what's important to you in your day-to-day life and your lifestyle, and then trying to find an area that covers most of those bases, because nowhere's perfect. Nowhere's probably going to give you, whether it's a certain part of a particular town or city or a certain region, it's never perfect. And I think often the only way to find your sort of ultimate destination, if you like, is to live in the area or the region for 6 to 12 months minimum.
The 12 is ideal, because then you see all this, let's say,
exactly.
Because I remember I've lived in Nice, I've lived in Bordeaux, I've lived in Toulouse, and I've lived a bit, but I've lived only a few months in Lyon, for example, and in Burgundy. And I realized what I know about those places then is limited to the month I've been there.
Yeah.
Might not reflect what's happening all year long, or so
yeah,
no, definitely.
Yeah, no, I think 12 months is minimum. 12 months is ideal, really.
And just sticking on those, because also you've had the pleasure of having kids who lived in around Pau or big cities like Bordeaux and stuff. And now in Normandy, so you've seen small cities, mid-sized cities, big cities. Any differences typically with apartments or houses, which are typically differ from other countries, I don't know, amenities, size, heating?
I think there's a couple of factors to take into consideration here. If you are looking at a city which is a university city and the campus is, quite central to the city, it's going to make renting smaller places harder. I mean, if, for example, the campus is way sort of outside of the city and there's a ton of student accommodation on campus, that's not going to have such a big effect. I think that cities around the size of Pau are probably quite ideal for people to really relocate to, because they're big enough to have everything you might need and want, and a lot sort of is on offer socially and culturally. There's often quite a big not just expat community, but a multinational community, which is quite nice when you come to another country. I think really big cities, it's easy to get lost in and feel just lost, basically. So I think a kind of human-sized, large town city is probably a pretty good option for relocation. And then whether you want to be within that city or on the edge or just outside. I mean, we lived for a long time, sort of literally 10 minutes outside of Dax, which Dax is a large town rather than a small city, but it had everything we needed. And it meant that within 10 minutes, I could pop in and out with the kids and train stations and all that kind of thing. That was pretty ideal for us for a long time. I didn't want to live in a town, but I wanted the town's facilities and conveniences on my doorstep.
Mm, mm. Yeah, true. And
And
actually,
also in terms of rentals, if you go a bit bigger, there will be more choice of rental properties.
yeah, sure. Yeah, by definition, yeah, more demand. You're right.
Yeah. Equally, you have to, prices vary enormously. And with the extension of the TGV line down to Bordeaux and the reduction in travel times from Paris over the last few years, Bordeaux rents are now basically like Parisian rents. It's just astronomical. So
Bordeaux went much bigger those past years. Yeah. Mm.
So,
Yeah, but Ben, talking about those, like cities and different places, from your experience, what regions or cities or like particularly challenging, for foreigners to find rental properties? Like I have in mind places like Paris and Nice, obviously, which are high on demand, but maybe you have places you have in mind, and why?
They're easier. Yeah. Well, Paris and Nice are like by a long way the hardest. This always comes down to your objectives with renting in the first year and what kind of budget you're coming to the market to as well. Those are big parameters. But if you're the classic requirement is 1 to 2 bed apartment or small townhouse generally that's in a place with good transport links and can allow you to basically act as your base so you can explore France or the rest of Europe or find your dream home that you want to move to. That tends to be the way. And so you can look at Nice and go, well, I really want the Mediterranean there. I want the beautiful mountains in the background. Well, a great alternative to there would be down towards the Spanish border, right? And you've still got the mountains there. You've still got the beautiful sunshine. You've got the great Mediterranean coastline. But that literally comes in at half the cost in terms of rent
like
for
Narbonne,
something.
for example, or Montpellier.
Yeah, Narbonne, Perpignan. You've got the small towns in and around Narbonne and Montpellier, which still have great transport links back into the bigger cities that then you can explore from.
Yeah, well, like your wife's from Marseille, isn't she?
Well, right, yeah, she is. Well, she's from. So this is a great example. She's from Toulon, or just outside Toulon, right? So that's a fairly big town, but not on the same scale as Marseille, and so you can get really, really good rental options there if you want to be on that part of the Côte d'Azur and get all the benefits from being close to the Alps and the Mediterranean at the same time without paying a premium. And then that frees up so much for you to be able to explore the best of Europe from that point onwards, rather than being hamstrung on this tiny closet apartment somewhere. That's how I'll break it down. Again, rather than necessarily Paris, Lyon is comparatively you get really, really good value in Lyon.
For the money, definitely.
For the money. It's really, really interesting helping people on this because I think it's like it comes with fashionable trends. I was really surprised over the last 2 months the amount of inquiries I've had for looking for rentals in Dijon, for example. I don't necessarily know why Dijon is overly attractive versus not at all. Why not? Why not Dijon?
If you like wine, if you like Burgundy,
if you like wine, if you like mustard, I don't know. And so very, very interesting to see how that market develops this year and if rent increases as a result. But I suppose the trick or the message I'd like to get across to people is if you're slightly more flexible with the towns and cities you're trying to move to, really drill in and be playful with the lifestyle that you might end up with by using one of the peripheral towns. Rather than the large cities, because I think it could really magnify your experience in France.
Actually, because so in France, it's the definition will also be different, but what would be the pro and cons of like furnished versus unfurnished? What does it mean when you rent a
I
furnished
mean,
place? Like, well, do you have, because
it's
those are
quite
actually
drastic,
practical
isn't it?
advice.
Yeah. And it's not like in the UK, because unfurnished place in the UK would still come with a fridge and a cooker, invariably. Whereas in France, like unfurnished means nothing. Yeah, you
Mm,
turn up, there's just
yeah,
nothing there.
that's it.
Brutal,
Yeah, you got some
right?
Fair.
walls.
Yeah, if you're lucky. If you're lucky, the walls are still sort of, but like I and then on top of that, you've the length of tenancy involved is usually slightly different. So with a furnished property, it's maximum 12 months, right? But on a unfurnished property in France, it's not uncommon to say, well, we'll have a 3 month lease in there, which is quite reassuring because if you're rocking up and you're having to put the washing machine, tumble dryer, fridge, hob, and you don't want to be kicked out after 12 months, really. That'd be quite annoying. So those are factors. My preference when I've been helping people is pretty much always furnished, because at least people are turning up and they can actually live in these properties straight away.
But furnished doesn't mean like they'll come in and there's a couch and a bed and something, or does it?
No, again, furnished. It's like France is in the extremes in these things. Usually, it's but I mean, I've had a couple of properties where there's been fully stacked towels, sheets for the bed, all that kind of jazz for people. Which
Fully furnished.
I know, yeah. This is the thing. You take
That's
inspiration
rare.
from the others
That's
on
not
that
the
level.
norm.
I think
That's going some, but
if I can jump in here, legally, furnished has to provide like a pillow or two pillows if it's a double bed and a duvet, and it's quite bizarre the list of things that you do have to provide. I'm speaking here as a landlord. What I found was that all of the tenants wanted to bring their own stuff, even though it was meant to be furnished. But I totally agree with Ben that the definition of furnished is it's not really as we would
Yeah.
think of things being furnished, because generally French landlords tend to dump all of their old tut in there. It may be stuff that's been chucked out by other family members. And again, when we were looking to rent, and especially with having had 3 children who've gone through higher education, some of them for up to 7 years at a time, I have extensive experience of the French rental market. And I've seen places being rented out that I wouldn't have let my dog sleep in there on the sofa or the bedding that was provided. I mean, just squalid. And again, because it was Bordeaux, astronomical rents, and people were desperate to take them because that was their only option. So, yeah, there's furnished and furnished. So,
Yeah.
goes back to the other point. If you can go in person and see what kind of furniture you might be inheriting, it's probably a good idea to do so, right? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So I think I'll try to jump into some of the audience's questions. I think it's a good time to start doing that. Okay, I will try to keep it short if you can. So planning move to Strasbourg, is there a good time of year to search for rental housing? So I think it's a question you've touched base on, Ben.
Yeah, I mean Strasbourg's kind of not so it's more immune to that seasonal cycle than maybe other parts of France are. So I wouldn't feel too scared about approaching that even at the height of the summer season, for example, in Strasbourg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've mentioned this one. Yeah, one is a 2 month rental okay for a long-term visitor visa for the USA? So in theory, no, but in real life, if you've pre-booked and prepaid for that accommodation for the past couple of years, it's been accepted. So unless there's a political change, it should be okay. But you should still prefer the 1 year if you can. I'm European Canadian citizen. I want to know if you deal with people that apply for residence permit for retired. Any suggestions? Yeah, well, get in touch afterwards. We can help you or point you in the right direction, Emil. When is the busy season? Most supply for rentals, spring or fall?
So most supply, fall's the best. That's when all the summer rentals have come off, and hopefully there's a load of landlords out there. I've gone, oh my God, there's no way I want to do another season like that. These tourists have come in, partied in my house all year, and I don't want it anymore. That's when we want to be speaking to them, really, because we could potentially convince them to take you on as a long-term rental instead.
I'm applying for my long-term rental visa now. Congratulations, Diana. and it should be submitted on, I have to reverse this in my head, April the 2nd, or yeah, I suppose. Or is it the 4th of February? Oh, the 4th of February. Yeah, 3 months prior to my arrival, which is, oh no, yeah, I've probably reversed this. The 4th of May. Yeah, no, okay, no, that's, yeah. This information is helpful. What is late spring? Is it May?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in my mind, May, because then you've got the Easter holidays and things generally, and that gets busy in France regardless, doesn't it? And then from that point onwards, I just really, really difficult to secure opportunities, particularly if you're along the coast.
Sharon's asking, are my receipts showing my paid booking for my Airbnb sufficient documentation for the long stay visa? Yes, again, still not compliant, but should be accepted. So yes. Susan's asking, are resident open a landlord to 3-year leases? Do they tend to prefer natives over immigrants? What about a grant me or simple grant profile? Does it help? Ben?
Sorry, I got caught on I saw Toulouse and got nostalgic on one of the chats. So could you read that again, please, Fab?
Oh yeah, well, I've marked it as answered. Sorry, Susan.
No, Susan, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry. I saw an interesting one from Christy Witt. So her sister lives in Toulouse, and so they're getting a 1-year visa to go and spend some time with her there for their whole year. And they're asking, should they buy or rent whilst they're there? And I'm like, if you look into notaire fees in France when you're trying to buy somewhere, sorry, all my estate agent friends in France, but it costs a lot of money to buy in France generally. Though, to recoup those notaire fees is going to be a hard swing.
8% of the transaction usually. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe renting might be there.
And also, a lot of renting first, just to make sure, that they're not rushing into buying as well.
Right. This is it.
Okay, Patrick's asking, thank you for the seminar. In your experience, is the yearly rate significantly lower than the weekly monthly rate when renting an Airbnb or JIT?
Depends the area, right? But
oh yeah, depends how busy the area.
Yeah, I would say very variable.
Carmel is asking, Irlandaise ici, so Irish here, considering Rennes, Brittany. Nice. My family is from Brittany. Is it a vibrant enough city for someone in their 30s? Thank you so much. Oh, well, Rennes is actually a student city.
What a place.
Yeah. So if you don't mind a bit of cold, because that's not in south of France, so that is going to be a bit cooler than Bordeaux, Nice, or those places. But it's definitely a very vibrant city. Especially if,
I'd just like to point out here that people around here refer to the incoming population as climate refugees because so many people are moving up north because they're sick of either torrential rain or blistering heat or forest fires. So yeah, I say come to Rennes. It's just down the road from me. Great place. Love it.
When renting a furnished, Ed is asking, when renting a furnished property, can you negotiate with the landlord what to keep?
Depends on the landlord.
Yeah,
I would say.
Totally.
And how flexible they are and how realistic you are as well. And are you? There's the same friendship. It depends on the feeling between you both. I would say.
I have a question, and this one is, I would say, specifically for you, Kat, because so it's from Kathy. And I know you love this name, don't you?
I do.
So Kathy is asking, do US citizens need to provide, because, sorry, Kathy, but Kat doesn't like to be called Kathy, but that's fine. That's a private joke. No, we keep on doing.
Yeah.
Do US citizens need to provide police, FBI background check for long stay visas and or rental in France? Well, luckily, no. So, and actually, it's not even required for visas. For the non-working types of visas. If you do want to get some sort of a business type of visa, yes, but otherwise, or obviously like a passport talent or other. Can you name some particularly desirable peripheral towns to Paris? Well, reach out because there's quite a few. 33,000 cities in France, and around Paris, there are literally dozens and dozens of cities. So.
And that would actually be a really good question to ask on Survive France, because you'll get proper, information and local intel from people who are actually on the ground, who can say, well, I live near X and it's, like Y. And so, yeah, I would definitely, those kind of questions. I mean, obviously do reach out to us after this webinar, but again, use the community forums. That's what they're there for. And you will get really great unbiased advice.
Definitely, yeah. And actually, for pretty much anything in France, rent, buying, like even where to buy food, to find your US food or British food, whatever it is, there's really everything there. Gigi is asking, do you say Bordeaux prices super high now to rent, also to buy? Yeah, no. So, well, Bordeaux is my hometown. That's where I was raised, and my stepmom and my sister is still there. So it always has been busy. But now that it's basically 2 hours from Paris with the train, the fast train, yeah, the prices have skyrocketed. I mean, it's not twice the price as it used to be. It's just more expensive because the place is just much bigger, and now it's not exactly, but it's definitely on the top 10 biggest cities in France. Maybe even in the top five. So yeah, so it's like you get the price of the top X cities, So. Any advice on a storage facility that does not require a RIB, which is bank details in France, to rent a storage unit? Cat or Ben? I don't know. Do you have that answer?
I would just say at this point, going back to the conversation we had earlier in the evening about bank accounts, if you don't have a French bank account and thus you don't have a RIB, open a Revolut account and then you can have a French RIB, which you can then waive at anybody that you might need to waive it at in France. So I highly recommend that as an option before you open a proper, fully fledged French bank account as well.
Regarding dossier, does my status as a retiree whose savings are appreciably more than my monthly income pension affect the landlord? Ben, can you get that?
Could you read that again, please?
Yeah, how does my status as a retiree whose savings are appreciably more than my monthly income, which is the pension?
It's a really, really good question, this, because that'd be the case for most people looking to, spend some of their retirement in France. It does have an impact, because when you go on to, and not always positive, when you go to a guarantor website like Garant Me or Cautioneo, and you input your details, it will ask for income and proof of income, and it will also ask for savings and then proof of savings. And so, look, I'm not behind their algorithms, so I can't say for sure. But when they generate the certificate out the other end, it will state the amount that they're willing to guarantee you up to. So, I'm pulling numbers out, but $130,000 in savings would equate to, say, 1,100 euros a month in guarantee that they're willing to back you on. And that certificate is then enough for you to then turn to a landlord in France and say, hey, consider me. Now, obviously, 120,000 is 130,000 a hell of a lot more than like 15,000 euros, but that's the sort of the ratio. If you had income coming in, that certificate would then be bumped up to 2,000, 3,000, because income's more valuable than savings, simply because your savings could disappear from one day to the next. You could suddenly decide to have a really, really good day at the casino, and that statement would be worth nothing. So that's how you play it. And again, it's really important to have that chat with the landlord there, because they'll get a sense for the person that you are and the life that you're trying to build in France. And as long as they're invested in that and they can see the statement on Garant Me, savings should be enough to get you over the line.
And just to clear that out, you can help them with that, all of that, having those conversations with the landlord, trying to find.
Yeah, that's the game, really. Pretty much every day is.
No, it was worth asking.
Yeah.
Kim is asking, actually, it's an interesting question because can you please explain the taxe d'habitation, which is the residence tax indeed? So for property renters, you should not have to experience that. Okay, that's if that's your main property, the taxe d'habitation is only for those with a certain income or those well, for second homeowners. That's what you pay on the second home or your second properties. So well, maybe Ben, you have something to add on to that?
No, no, that's right. That's a good thing. I mean, what's the timing, Fab, with the when that's more the tax foncière, isn't it? If you're in the property from the 1st of
Property
January.
tax, yes, tax
Yeah.
foncière is
Yeah.
is what you pay for owning a property. So
Mhm.
yeah, but so that you only pay if you're the property owner.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, well, actually, well, Sonny, a question in relation to that. John's asking if we're looking at a rental as a second home, meaning not a full-time residence, does this affect our ability to rent?
So it could do. I've had a scenario where it was actually owned by someone moving back to the UK and they weren't ready to sell the property though, and they wanted someone else to come in and make sure the house was lived in. And part of the mindset around that was, well, we want someone in the house to make sure that no one comes and burgles the contents or something horrible like that, but also someone there to look after the place and keep the grass cut and all that jazz. So it may not be an issue. The landlord doesn't need to know your business and how much you're actually using the property, but it'll become quickly evident to neighbours and surroundings if the house isn't being lived in from the outside. So maybe if that's the route you're considering, maybe consider an extremely low maintenance property.
It's a good question because like I'd be curious to know who gave this advice. Paige is asking, is it true you can open a BNP Paribas account from the US and then change the address once you have a French address? So I'll give my take and then yours, Ben, maybe. Because well, basically, so there's when you open up a French bank account, you open up the bank account either as a non-resident or as a resident. Okay. So obviously, if you open a bank account from the US, you're opening a bank account as a non-resident. So that should be with your US address. So then you can update the bank and tell them or inform them that you're no longer a non-resident, but you became a resident, and then they will update your file. That's more like an upgrade because basically you're changing even like the type of account. It won't change the bank details or anything like that, but you're then changing, from non-resident to resident. Because that's what I'm reading between the lines, if what you're trying to do is to open up a bank account from the US using an address in France, pretending you're a resident, but you're not, and then update your address once you do have one in France, well, that's cheating.
Also super hard to do because you need documents attaching you to that address in France.
No, but people can write you an attestation d'hébergement. I've seen this done.
Right, yeah, so they'll send that through, which will be one form of proof of address to that, but they make it harder and harder and harder as time goes on to be able to progress, Plus, once they pick up that you are still in the States, they can change the terms and conditions around your account. They'll ask you to send over a certain amount of funds that always must sit on account and never go below it. I think you may be creating more problems for you. I mean, Kat's suggestion using platforms out there can be a really good way of
Easier.
doing it. Just make sure you use a provider that gives you an IBAN that's French denominated, starts with FR.
Yeah, well, actually, it doesn't even need to be French, by the way, to have like direct debits, as long as it's within what they call the SEPA zone, like the EU zone, basically. Any countries in the European area, economic EEE is like economic European economic something.
Yeah.
Area. Yeah, okay. So Sharon is asking, do you use an Airbnb or can you use an Airbnb address to open up a bank account? No, that you cannot. It needs to be a permanent address. Okay, so well, let's try to fit in a few last questions and then we'll call this a wrap. Are renters required to purchase any property insurance in France? Oh, an insurance question. Yes, that's mandatory. But obviously only for 1 year, for the permanent rental contracts. But yes, it is mandatory, and the renter will ask for the certificate of insurance every year covering, the next year. Question for Ben from Bayern. Do landlords in France ever entertain a rent prepayment, meaning like 6 or 12 months, to avoid having to prove income or provide a guarantee or guarantees? Sorry.
Well, Kat mentioned her own experience where she had to consider that path. I haven't had that scenario yet.
I think it's illegal now to do that.
Yeah, like I just I'm pretty sure it is too. I mean, you have scenarios where, again, if you've got if the landlord is open to it, he could go to his bank and say, I want to start a caution bancaire. So create that escrow account, essentially. And the funds could sit there. That's a way of doing it. But ideally, you want to avoid that scenario because you don't have, it's not like in the UK where you've got what's the scheme called, Kat, where, where you send money in, it's like government tracked, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I can't think.
That thing, like tenant, it's a tenant protection scheme thing.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but I cannot think what it's called because
where the funds are only released. It's like a deposit protection scheme.
Yeah,
so the money goes in.
A similar, it's like the Vizel. But although there's also something we should probably mention, although it's not necessarily applicable to people from overseas, but you may hear about a deposit scheme called the Vizel scheme, which is again state funded. So that means that as a landlord, your deposit is pretty safe, and any damage is going to be pretty well covered. But anyway, no, I can't. I can't think of the scheme you're in, but we know what we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, so the message is again, cultural difference, I suppose, in terms of the way of doing things. When you're paying deposits over to a landlord, and the last 1 or 2 months, your only proof really that you've paid that is the transaction receipt, right, for your banking, and that's the thing that's like your bedrock to getting your deposit back and all the rest of it. So I don't know. If I was in your shoes, I probably wouldn't feel overly comfortable now sending 12 months or 6 months worth over, and my only connection to that money moving forward is this banking receipt. It's just, probably something to avoid. Honestly, the trick around it is just make sure you are using the community channels, or you're networking constantly, or reaching out to landlords directly, so you have enough choices. Because if you've got choices, you don't need to.
Exactly. That was exactly it. We didn't have any choice at that point in time. So, yeah.
Maybe one last question for you, Ben, about, because we mentioned a lot, we talked a lot about property rentals, but basically how to get a property rental. I mean, when is it beneficial to work with a property agent and potentially what should I expect in terms of fees or, things like that, actually, because we didn't mention this.
So I think you have an easier time if you're looking to go to either Paris or Nice. Agencies are going to be the best way to go because it's such a prime market. Things are moving so fast, and landlords don't really want anything to do with it. Usually, it's completely outsourced. That's been my experience. Otherwise, I still think that the community path and you're going direct to landlords is the easiest way as a non-resident, because you won't hit the basic criteria that will sit with agencies to take you serious enough, and that's the sad reality. Past that, that was the benefits of working with agents.
Yeah, and the price, potentially, if you have an idea.
Price, yeah. So agency fees are usually between 1,600 and 2.5 grand as a way to get this thing going. And then you have admin fees on top of that. which again, another good reason to go straight to a landlord if you can.
Well, through you then, because if
Yeah.
I got that correctly, you're cheaper than those agents. So
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, yeah, you have to. I charge a search fee, a finder fee, right, of 1,200 euros done in 2 installments, so 600 euros at the start to get the work done, and start searching on your behalf, and then 600 euros once you moved in, you got the key and you're happy and everything's la-di-da. But the important thing is, if I can't find you the property, then I'll pay the 600 euros back from the start, so money back
that's
guarantee.
amazing. That's very nice.
Yeah. I wish I'd have known you in 2006 or whenever it was.
I would have been much use then, to be fair, in the middle of nowhere in the Tarn Garonne.
Okay, one last question, and then we'll hand up there because it's a very good question from Diane. Sorry if I mispronounce. What's due when you're renting, 2 months or first and last?
Sorry, that
What's the
lost you.
deposit like, basically?
Oh, deposit.
Yeah, it's 2 months. Usually it's 2 months rent, right? And I suppose you could view it as first and last.
Oh, and we didn't mention this because if you walk away, like you trigger the notice, and so like you want to leave the property, whatever you've been there for 1 month, for 3 years, so it doesn't change the notice. And obviously, we didn't mention this clearly, but there is no penalty, there is no, like early moving fee or whatever. So, the law protects the tenant in France. So you get the whole deposit back. Well, unless you've messed up with the place, but and you don't have a penalty even if you've just arrived. Yeah. So that's it. Okay, thank you guys. I think we'll call it for this evening because it's way past beer o'clock or wine o'clock, depending on what you fancy. Definitely is in France. Thank you, Ben and Kat. Thank you, Nani, for also addressing all those questions in the background. Thank you for all the love. Thank you guys for watching. As disclosed, we will be sharing your questions with the panelists so that I can answer any unaddressed questions if they have time. We'll also send you a follow-up email where you'll get, opportunities to engage with Ben and Kat and obviously myself and my team. So again, thank you all. Thank you for joining. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bonne soirée. Au revoir.